Well, what comes next? Let's say we did kill the supreme leader. Let's say that the regime did fall. What makes us think that in the chaos that would come, that what would happen, downstream would not be even more dangerous? And we've seen this over and over and over again.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today I've had political commentator and author of How the Right Lost Their Mind, Charlie Sykes. We've spoken about this new 2-week deadline from Donald Trump. He's issued it to Iran, saying he'll potentially use US military force, but he will take 2 weeks to make that decision to see if they come back to the negotiating table to talk about ending Iran's nuclear program. So all that today, we speak about Vladimir Putin's role. We speak about this TACO acronym from Trump, the fact that he keeps using these 2-week deadlines. So much to discuss today on the Trump Report. You can watch us every day, Monday through Friday on Times Radio's YouTube, or you can stream us every day as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Charlie Sykes, a political commentator and author of How the Right Lost Their Mind. Thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Thank you.
Well, it's hard to keep up with everything going on in Trumpland, but you and I are going to try our very hardest to keep the audience and our listeners, now that we're a podcast, very much up to date with what is happening in your side of the world. But what we now know is that Donald Trump has officially delayed his decision to use military action in Iran by 2 weeks. So in layman's terms, the United States will not bomb Iran or get involved militarily for another 2 weeks, which gives Iran leaders more time to come back to the negotiating table to decide whether they want to give up their nuclear weapons. So how effective do you think this 2-week deadline will be?
Well, first of all, you have to understand what a 2-week deadline means for Donald Trump. I mean, this has become kind of this has become an inside Washington D.C. joke, because everything is always 2 weeks. His health plan is coming in 2 weeks. His tax plan is coming in 2 weeks. He's going to come up with sanctions on Russia in 2 weeks. This is the way that Donald Trump avoids making a decision. So the 2 weeks needs to be taken, shall we say, somewhat metaphorically. So Donald Trump has gone up to the brink, but he has backed away from the brink. And once again, we don't know exactly what he's going to do. But I do think that it would be reasonable to assume that he's looking for an off-ramp. Donald Trump loves the trappings of the military. He loves the parades, but he is not a warrior president. And I don't think, and he spent the last several decades railing against foreign wars. So I think it would be reasonable to interpret this as Donald Trump backing away from the brink of war.
And as you mentioned, this 2-week deadline, it's been thrown around a lot. May 29th, last month, we saw him, of course, give this 2-week deadline to Vladimir Putin to prove that he wanted peace. We've heard absolutely nothing since that 2-week deadline. Vladimir Putin has orchestrated a number of attacks on Russia since, one of which killed an American civilian this week, which we've also heard no condemnation from Donald Trump about that, which I do find quite bizarre. Tammy Bruce spoke about it, but there has been no criticism of Putin for orchestrating a kill on an American civilian in Kyiv. But how do you think this 2-week deadline, the fact that he's used this so many times and hasn't followed through, will shape Iran's decision?
Well, look, I mean, Iran does not want the war any more than Donald Trump wants the war. So, yes, as you pointed out, this gives them a chance to engage in more negotiations, which are taking place. It also gives them a chance to move stuff around, maybe hide stuff, and determine whether or not it has allies and what its allies are willing to do at this particular point. One of the big questions is, we talk about Vladimir Putin. Will Vladimir Putin help Iran? Will the Chinese help Iran? And if they do, how does that change the geopolitical situation? And certainly the Chinese are watching Donald Trump very, very closely. And they're trying to see, they're trying to separate the bluster and the threats and the all-cap social media posts from what he actually does. And once again, quite frankly, Donald Trump has put himself in kind of a no-win box. Because if he backs away, he will send a message. It will look like he is once again caught bluffing, and it will look weak.
And we'll get into that that situation where we do see China watching in a little bit, but I want to get your thoughts on my regular guest, Robert Kelly, professor in South Korea. I'm not sure if you're aware of him, but he wrote this tweet, which I thought was interesting to talk about. He wrote, the reason Trump will take 2 weeks to decide on participation in the Iran war is so that we spend the next 2 weeks talking about him. So I wanted to get your reaction to that.
Oh no, no, that's very insightful. Look, Donald Trump loves the attention and he loves being in control. But see, this is the paradox that I think people need to understand, that he's in control up until the war begins, and then the other side gets a vote. Reality gets a vote. Things can spin out of control. There's chaos. So that he's in control up until the moment that the shooting starts. Now, I want to remind people that we went through almost this exact scenario back in 2017 when it was North Korea. Remember, he was talking about fire and fury and all of the saber rattling, but then he figured out a way to become good friends with the North Koreans. Well, he will take any negotiation, any concession as a win.
And most Western leaders and allies of the United States will agree with Donald Trump that Iran just shouldn't have nuclear weapons. What Donald Trump's perception on that is nothing controversial. Most of his long-standing strategic military partners, allies on the West, or not even in the West, would agree with him. But the decision they think should be done, most people believe it should be done through diplomacy rather than, of course, military action. So what we'll see today is, of course, members of Iran meeting with the UK, Germany, and French representatives after Steve Witkoff's 5 failed attempts to get this nuclear deal over the line. So, how successful do you think this meeting will be today, Charlie, between representatives from France, the UK, and Germany, who will meet with Iran's ministers and discuss the end of this conflict?
Well, I would suggest that today is probably not going to be the turning point in all of this. Like, it's important to keep in mind that we have been dealing with this for what, decades now, 20 years, talking about Iran and nuclear weapons. The problems in the Middle East are somewhat intractable, and they're not going to be quickly or easily solved. But to your point, I mean, this is something that. And this is reflected in public opinion polls. Look, the world would be a vastly safer, better place if Iran did not have nuclear weapons. The world would be a vastly better place if we had a different regime. But achieving that through war is incredibly dangerous and unpredictable. And the fact that we were talking about going to war without our allies makes it even more problematic. Because once that war begins, you have 40,000 American troops in the Middle East who are at risk. If the Iranians shut off the Straits of Hormuz, they would disrupt the global economy. Trump loves dressing up as the strong man, but he's not a warrior president. He does not want his presidency consumed by something that he would absolutely not be able to control.
Of course, and that's what he campaigned on, that he was a no-war president. But I want to get your thoughts on what the Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, he said that if the United States or Israel kill Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, it would lead to the birth of extremist moods inside Iran, and those who are speaking about killing Khamenei, they should keep it in mind. They will open Pandora's Box. Do you think that that's a threat from the Kremlin to Israel and the United States to not kill Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei?
Well, yes, but it's also a reality check. I mean, let's just step back. It is against American law to target leaders for assassination. This is something that we generally don't discuss openly, talking about assassinating the leader of a foreign nation. So, I mean, that was another one of the red lines that was crossed. And of course, this is something else that I think looms over all of this is that, well, what comes next? Let's say we did kill the supreme leader. Let's say that the regime did fall. What makes us think that in the chaos that would come, that what would happen, downstream would not be even more dangerous? And we've seen this over and over and over again. So I thought it was incredibly dangerous that we're even talking about assassinating this elderly leader, as if somehow that would solve the problem. And of course, I hate to sound like I'm agreeing with a Kremlin spokesman, but there's no question about it that it opens a Pandora's box.
And I think a lot of analysts and a lot of experts, Charlie, since this discussion have come to light, have said that this conversation should make, or is making, Vladimir Putin feel fearful for his own life, because if Ali Khamenei is killed, what does that lead to? Does that lead to the United States and its allies to think perhaps they could kill Putin, perhaps they could kill Kim Jong-un, perhaps they could kill Xi Jinping? You never know. Is that what happens, that those you don't agree with, those you have conflict with, the answer is to assassinate their leader?
Well, that's the Pandora's box. And whatever the West would do, and I doubt that they would target all of those leaders for assassination, Vladimir Putin is a deeply paranoid man, and this will feed into his paranoia. So this again makes the world a much more unstable and dangerous place.
Donald Trump, he said that he spoke to Vladimir Putin this week. They keep having these phone conversations where they don't really discuss ending the war in Russia and Ukraine. Putin, according to Trump, he said he offered his mediation skills as someone that has relationships with Iran, Israel, and the United States. And Donald Trump said he responded saying, focus on your own war, which of course was quite a good response from Trump, I will say, because yes, focus on your own war, Putin, do not get involved in another one. But do you see a world in which we would see Putin involved in this conflict between Israel and Iran? We of course know that Iran supplies many drones and missiles to Russia.
Well, given the fact that almost every really horrible timeline turns out to be true, anything is possible. I do think that it is interesting to watch whether Russia intervenes in any way to help Iran. I mean, in theory, they are allies, right? I mean, the Iranians have been helping the Russians. What have the Russians done to help the Iranians? And again, now we're in the area of speculation, but you could certainly imagine the situation changing dramatically. What if the Russians airlifted a brigade of Russian troops into Tehran? What would happen if the Chinese did? What would happen if it turns out that Iran does have allies and these become the tripwires for a wider conflict? I think that changes the dynamic completely. But the whole notion that Vladimir Putin, a notorious war criminal, would have any role in bringing peace to the Middle East is just completely delusional.
Delusional and ironic, Charlie, that this would be the war that gets resolved, and it's the war and it's resolved with the help of Vladimir Putin. But I want to get your thoughts on what's kind of been circulating the internet is, of course, Tucker Carlson's coverage of this conflict. He's a staunch opponent of the United States getting involved in the conflict in Israel and Iran. He kind of became a little bit famous for his critique of the way the US got involved in Iraq, and he's, of course, trying to make sure that this doesn't happen. But he has been a big supporter of Donald Trump, so it's interesting to see his take on this. But he has warned that a full-scale war involving the United States would end Donald Trump's presidency. Do you agree with that?
Well, no. I mean, we don't know how that would actually play out, and there are. It is. I would caution people against reading too much into the MAGA civil war. I mean, the MAGA movement is not going to break with Donald Trump about this. On the other hand, the divisions in the debate have become very, very nasty. I'm sure you've seen Tucker Carlson sitting down with Ted Cruz. These are two big Trump supporters. And the level of nastiness and the division is very, very real. People like Steve Bannon, very close to Donald Trump, very close to the MAGA movement, so warning about it. Look, there is the fact is that Trump ran as the America First president. And the paradox, of course, is that he's the strong man, but it's sort of militarized isolationism, if there's such a thing. And he promised the end to these endless foreign wars. And there's a huge part of the MAGA base that actually believes that. What they forgot is that Donald Trump has very few core values. There are very few principles there. And so he's willing to throw them under the bus. But there is a significant, and it's a very loud segment of MAGA, which is deeply opposed, not just to American support for Ukraine, but also for joining Israel in the attack on Iran. How that actually plays out, we don't know. Tucker Carlson, when he talks about the end of the presidency, I think what he's warning Donald Trump is you have all of these plans, and your presidency can be consumed by getting embroiled in the Middle East. And we've seen this in the past. I mean, how many American presidencies have been consumed by a foreign war that resulted? I mean, you can go back to Lyndon Johnson in Vietnam. You can talk about what happened with Joe Biden just recently with Afghanistan. It often does not end well for American presidents.
It plagues on their legacy, Charlie, and we know that Trump is so obsessed with his legacy and he wants to do so much in just the 4 years that he has. Because right now, we know that the Constitution will only let him have 4 more years, 3.5. So if he doesn't change that, then yeah, you're right. If he enters a war, that will completely dominate his next 3.5 years. But I wonder if Tucker Carlson is speaking on behalf of the MAGA base, because the thing is that perhaps if the United States bombs Iran's nuclear capabilities and they're without nuclear capabilities, they're without an Ayatollah, we don't know what could happen next. We don't know if that would spark a wider war and the US troops are sent boots on the ground and how that would affect him.
That's right, and escalation, and again, this is not what Donald Trump, weirdly enough, he wants to be the strong man who drops the big buster bomb. I mean, he loves that sort of thing, right? But Donald Trump also wants to be thought of as a peacemaker. He actually wants the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, this is a guy who is. You want to talk about cognitive dissonance. You want to talk about stuff going on in his head right now, and to have a presidency consumed by escalation and hitting back. I don't think that he has much of an appetite for that because, again, he loves the show. I don't think he wants to actually wage the war. I mean, he would love to be the war president on day one when we drop the bomb because everybody loves day one of a war. It's the days after that I think are so problematic, and that he cannot control.
And I've spoken to quite a number of people on the Trump Report this week, and we've all spoken about how this would affect military families, how they would go up against Trump, because, of course, they would be the main base of MAGA, maybe not even MAGA, but Republican, maybe even independent Democrats who do not want their sons and daughters going into another war that is not necessarily necessary. But, Charlie, you mentioned China before and how they're involved in this. We know that the combination of Israel and Israel and the United States' military capabilities is probably a lot more dominant than Iran's. But in the last week, we've seen several 747s. They've been spotted leaving China, flying to Iran, which has sparked concerns that the CCP is either helping transport cargo or they're helping people flee Iran at a time of war. If China got involved in this fight, how much would this change the nature of the conflict and change the game?
It would change it completely. But I think more significant is what China is seeing in the way this is playing out, because as Ukraine, Iran, Taiwan, all of these things are linked together. What is the American position? Is America bluffing or is America serious? And I think that's what the Chinese are really looking at. And of course, the Chinese are also going through these trade negotiations with the United States. And what they've seen is that they can play. Let me just back up a bit. I think one of the great paradoxes of our time is that three people really get Donald Trump, even more so than American politicians. I think Vladimir Putin gets Donald Trump. I think Benjamin Netanyahu gets Donald Trump. I think President Xi gets Donald Trump, which is basically that while other people are like, oh, we're really afraid this is a really scary guy, they look at him and go, we can play him. We know that he's bluffing. We know that if we push back, that he will cave in. There is this phrase that's out there about the taco trades. Taco, Trump always chickens out. And by the way, that hangs over this as well. So the Chinese are playing the long game, but they're also seeing exactly what kind of a chess match they're in with Donald Trump, if it's chess at all.
I do think the taco will be used a little bit more, Charlie, especially this 2 week deadline keeps being thrown around. I'm surprised no one's talking about the 2 week deadline that he put on Putin. I mean, I've been waiting for the 2 weeks to be up and we've heard absolutely nothing. But I want to get into a different diplomatic relationship. Donald Trump, he's had a kind of an unprecedented meeting this week. He hosted the leader of Pakistan's army chief at the White House among this ceasefire that's going on between Pakistan and India. Look, some analysts who have watched on this meeting believe that this might escalate tensions because, of course, India is such a major strategic partner of the United States. What do you think that this meeting with Pakistan's army chief will do?
Well, I think once again, this is Donald Trump. In order to understand Donald Trump, understand that he is the executive producer of the Trump show, of the Trump presidency. And as part of that show, he loves these Oval Office meetings where it looks like he is in control and that he is the peacemaker. So once again, this is part of his image that he is the one who is going to stop war and stop conflict, which is another reason why I think that he backed away from, involving the United States in Iran. You cannot launch a war and be a peacemaker necessarily simultaneously. So I think what you're going to see is Donald Trump thinking that I am the only person in the world that can get India and Pakistan to lower their tensions, as if that has not also been a decades-long intractable conflict between those countries. Donald Trump is not going to resolve that in this Oval Office meeting.
Well, on the note of the peacemaker title, Charlie, Trump, he has continued to claim that this ceasefire between India and Pakistan, which was brokered last month, was mediated by the United States. But then Narendra Modi came out and he has a bit of a different take on it. Well, his team does. India's most senior diplomat, Foreign Minister Vikram Misri, he said talks for seizing military action happened directly between India and Pakistan through existing military channels and on the insistence of Pakistan. Prime Minister Modi emphasised that India has not accepted mediation in the past and will never do. Now, I took that as a bit of a dig to Donald Trump's peacemaking title. What's your response to that?
Are you actually suggesting that perhaps Donald Trump exaggerated his role, that he made it up, that Donald Trump was not exactly a reliable narrator about his role in all of this? I mean, this again is, maybe we've become so numb to it. You were mentioning the 2 week, the 2 week deadline and why people aren't paying attention. It's because you're kind of used to it. When Donald Trump says 2 weeks, he's not going to do anything. When Donald Trump says it's all about me, it's like, okay, there's Donald Trump. Donald Trump will claim credit for anything that he thinks he can in any part of his presidency, and this is no different than that.
Charlie Sykes, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Thank you very much.